I was standing at Emma Carter's engagement party with a glass of mineral water in my hand, positioned slightly to the left of the main conversation circle. Not inside it, not fully outside it, exactly where someone like me is usually placed. The house was built of glass and pale stone, all clean lines and quiet wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Soft jazz floated above the murmur of curated laughter. Every surface reflected something polished. Silver trays, diamond rings, reputations. I had been introduced twice already. This is her friend from tech. The quiet one. She does something with systems. I let it pass. I always had. My dress was dark and simple. My hair pinned back in a way that suggested efficiency, not softness. I wore no visible insignia, no signal. It was easier that way. Jake Harper stood near the bar, surrounded by men who leaned toward him when he spoke. Former special forces, decorated. The kind of man whose stories arrive before he does. Broad shoulders, easy confidence. The room understood him immediately. He noticed me when the conversation thinned. His eyes moved over me quickly, categorizing. He smiled. "So what do you even do?" The phrasing was light, casual, amused. A few people nearby paused just enough to listen without appearing to. I stepped closer so I wouldn't need to raise my voice. For a second, I considered answering the way I usually did. I work in defense. I handle oversight. I'm in operations. All technically true, all comfortably vague. Instead, I leaned in slightly. I'm the Admiral who signed off on your missions. Just loud enough for him to hear. He blinked. The smile stayed in place, half a second too long, like it hadn't received the message yet. Then it disappeared. His face went completely still. There is a specific expression men wear when recalculating risk. He studied me properly now, not my dress, not my posture, my eyes. No way. It wasn't loud. It wasn't joking. It was reflex. Someone behind him stopped mid-sentence. A woman with a champagne flute froze in the motion of lifting it. The air did not explode. It tightened. I reviewed Task Group 7 authorizations for 3 years, I said evenly. Your unit rotated through twice. His jaw shifted slightly. He wasn't embarrassed. Not exactly. He was aligning memory. I watched it happen. The slow overlay of recognition, the classified briefings, the signatures, the coded approvals that determined whether helicopters lifted off or stayed grounded. He swallowed once. "Yes, ma'am." It came out quiet, controlled, but he said it. A few heads turned. Not enough to cause spectacle, enough to register change. I didn't elaborate. I didn't smile. I took a sip of water. Across the room, Emma had stopped speaking. She was watching us with the kind of attention people reserve for moments they will replay later. I had spent most of my life understanding rooms before rooms understood me. At home, standing out was treated like disruption. When I earned top placement in my class, my mother said, "Just don't make your cousins feel inadequate." When I received my first major assignment overseas, my father asked whether it was administrative. When I was promoted, he nodded once and changed the subject to someone else's engagement. Excellence was permitted. Visibility was not. So I learned precision. I learned restraint. I learned how to fold accomplishment into silence. It is not weakness to stay quiet, it is strategy, but strategy requires choice. That night, I chose differently. Jake's posture adjusted. Not submissive, professional. "You were in oversight?" he asked carefully. "I was," I said. The past tense was deliberate. "And now I hold broader authority." He nodded once. Understood enough. He didn't ask for details. He didn't test me. That restraint earned him something. The group around him shifted slightly, the unspoken hierarchy rearranging itself without announcement. A venture capitalist who had been explaining supply chains to me 20 minutes earlier now asked what division I operated under. I answered without over-explaining. A retired colonel moved closer, listening instead of evaluating. No one apologized for underestimating me. They simply adjusted, which is all I required. The rest of the evening continued smoothly. Music resumed its volume, laughter recalibrated, but I felt the shift like a line drawn cleanly across a map. Not loud, permanent. Later, on the terrace, a woman I barely knew approached me. "I had no idea," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "There was no reason for you to." She hesitated. "Why didn't you ever say?" "Because I was trained not to. Because being underestimated is sometimes operationally useful. Because in my family, diminishing myself kept peace. Instead, I said, it wasn't necessary." She nodded slowly. That was the truth, but it had also been habit. I realized something standing there, watching the city lights stabilize against the dark. I had been taught to be less, not incompetent, not fragile, just smaller, so others could remain comfortable, especially men accustomed to occupying the largest shape in the room. Shrinking is subtle. It lives in posture, in tone, in the instinct to soften achievements with humor, in adding phrases like, "it's nothing," or "I just got lucky." I had done it for years, and it had worked. I was liked, approachable, non-threatening, invisible. After that night, the recalibration extended beyond the party. Emails addressed me formally. Invitations listed my title without prompting. Conversations began at my level instead of 3 steps below it. More interesting was what changed internally. I stopped apologizing for schedule constraints caused by responsibility, stopped cushioning introductions, stopped laughing when someone minimized my role. I didn't become louder, I became accurate. There is a difference. Accuracy requires no performance. Weeks later, Jake saw me again at a closed briefing. He greeted me correctly. No smirk, no testing tone. Respect, clean and unadorned. I appreciated that more than apology. At home, the shift was less visible, but more significant. My mother commented that I seemed more direct. My father asked fewer questions about whether my job was stressful. He began listening when I spoke about policy, not because I demanded it, because something in me no longer permitted dismissal. Breaking from the habit of shrinking is not dramatic. It is incremental. You decline the invitation to minimize yourself. You answer the question fully. You stop managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own legitimacy. That night at Emma's engagement party was not about humiliating Jake Harper. It was about refusing to participate in my own reduction. The difference is quiet, but rooms feel it. I did not celebrate afterward. I did not replay the moment with satisfaction. I went home. I reviewed documents. I prepared for the next week. Life continued. Only now I occupied my full dimensions within it. Have you ever noticed how often you participate in your own invisibility? I wonder what would shift if you stopped. If this story resonates with you, I'd like to know why. And if you appreciate stories about quiet authority and precise turning points, you're welcome to stay. The week after Emma's party, I was called into a joint advisory session that had nothing to do with celebrations and everything to do with leverage. The room was narrow, no windows, frosted glass along one wall that suggested transparency without offering it. 12 seats, 11 men, and me. I arrived 5 minutes early, as I always do, not to impress anyone, to observe. 2 senators' aides were already seated, whispering over printed briefs they hadn't fully read. A defense contractor representative leaned back in his chair, confident in the weight of his company's name. A retired general stood at the far end, arms folded, watching everyone enter as if cataloging weaknesses. I took a seat midway down the table, not at the head, not at the end, exactly where oversight belongs. When the contractor began his presentation, he did not look at me once. He spoke in smooth projections, reduced risk, expanded coverage, accelerated response time. The numbers were arranged attractively. The tone was practiced. He was asking for authorization, not directly, but the implication was clear. Halfway through, he used the phrase, minimal civilian exposure. I wrote it down. When he finished, the chair of the committee nodded and asked for comments. The general spoke first, then one of the aides. They debated cost, timelines, political optics. No one addressed operational vulnerability. I waited. Silence, when used correctly, creates its own gravity. Finally, the chair turned toward me. Admiral? Just that. No embellishment. I closed my folder deliberately. Your model assumes uninterrupted satellite continuity, I said. The contractor smiled politely. Correct. It also assumes no hostile signal interference within a 32-mile perimeter. Yes. And yet your contingency protocol for jamming is reactive, not preventive. A pause. He adjusted his cuff. We've accounted for standard disruption. Standard disruption, I repeated evenly, is not what we're currently facing. The general shifted slightly. I continued. Last quarter, there were 3 documented signal intrusions in the northern corridor, none public, all sophisticated. The aides exchanged looks. They had not been briefed on that level. The contractor's smile thinned. Our system would adapt. After exposure, I said, which renders your minimal civilian exposure projection inaccurate. Silence again. No raised voice, no accusation, just fact. The chair leaned back. Are you recommending denial? I'm recommending revision, I replied. With preventive encryption layered before deployment. The general nodded once. The contractor inhaled slowly. That would delay rollout. Yes, I said. And increase cost. Yes. And reduce profit margin. I held his gaze. Yes. The room absorbed it. There are moments when men accustomed to unchecked progress realize they have encountered resistance that does not argue. It documents. The chair cleared his throat. Will require revision before proceeding. The contractor's pen stilled. Meeting adjourned. As chairs scraped and papers gathered, the general approached me. You held back until the end, he observed. I prefer precision, I said. He studied me a moment longer. You've changed, he added. No, I replied. I've stopped editing. He gave a short nod. Outside the building, the air was sharp with winter. My phone vibrated. Emma. Are you free for coffee? She asked. We met at a quiet place near the river, all concrete and understated design. She wore a pale coat and looked less composed than she had at her engagement party. I heard about the meeting, she said carefully. I stirred my tea once. News travels. She watched me. Jake said you dismantled a contract without raising your voice. I requested revision, I corrected. She smiled faintly. I used to think you stayed quiet because you didn't want attention, she said. And now? I think you stayed quiet because you didn't need validation. I didn't answer. The truth was more complicated. Silence had once been self-protection. In my family, speaking too clearly invited correction. My older brother excelled loudly. My achievements were acknowledged cautiously. Don't intimidate people, my mother would say. Tone it down, my father would add. So I learned to compress. At dinner tables, I redirected praise. At school, I avoided mentioning awards. In early briefings, I deferred to louder officers until they miscalculated. It became second nature. Emma traced the rim of her cup. Does it feel different? She asked. Yes, I said. How? Cleaner. She nodded slowly. I think I've been shrinking too, she admitted. For him? She hesitated. For everyone. I let the silence sit between us. Advice is often a form of control. Instead, I asked, what would happen if you didn't? She didn't answer immediately. We sat with the question. That evening, I returned home to a message from my father. He rarely called during the week. I saw your name in a policy brief, he said without greeting. Yes. You didn't mention you were leading that review. You didn't ask. A pause. He cleared his throat. Well, it's significant. Yes. He waited for me to soften it. I didn't. Another pause. Congratulations, he said finally. Thank you. The call ended quickly. It wasn't reconciliation. It was recalibration. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle resistance in other spaces. A junior analyst attempted to override one of my directives, citing urgency. I requested documentation. There was none. The directive stood. A board member suggested I delegate more visibly. I delegate effectively, I replied. Visibility, I had learned, is often code for performance. I no longer performed humility. I practiced accuracy. There is pressure that comes when a woman stops cushioning her competence. It does not arrive as confrontation. It arrives as scrutiny, tone analysis, micro-corrections. I observed them all. I did not react. One afternoon, Jake appeared at my office unannounced. He stood straighter than he had at the party. "Permission to speak freely?" he asked. I gestured to the chair. "Granted." He sat. "I underestimated you," he said. "Yes." "No accusation, no absolution." He nodded once. "I've been thinking about that." "Good." A faint smile crossed his face. "You don't make this easy." "It isn't meant to be." He leaned back slightly. Most people would have enjoyed that moment. I didn't. Why not? Because correction is not entertainment. He absorbed that. "I respect that," he said quietly. Respect. Clean. Unadorned. When he left, I returned to my desk and reviewed encrypted briefs until dusk. No celebration, no reflection, just work. The shift that began at Emma's party was not a dramatic transformation. It was removal. I removed the instinct to diminish, removed the reflex to apologize for occupying space, removed the habit of anticipating discomfort in others and managing it preemptively. The result was not aggression, it was alignment. Some people drifted away. They preferred the version of me that required less recalibration. Others moved closer. Conversations deepened, expectations clarified, authority settled where it had always belonged. One evening, alone in my apartment, I stood by the window and considered the pattern. For years, I believed shrinking was kindness, that reducing myself preserved harmony. But harmony built on distortion is fragile. Accuracy, though sharper, is stable. That night at Emma's engagement party had not changed who I was. It revealed it. The advisory session had not elevated me. It confirmed my position. The phone call from my father had not granted validation. It acknowledged reality. There is a quiet freedom in no longer negotiating your own legitimacy. It does not make life easier. It makes it honest. I did not become louder. I became precise. And rooms adjusted. Have you ever mistaken shrinking for humility? I'm curious what shifted for you when you stopped. If this story continues to resonate, stay with me. 3 weeks after the advisory session, the pressure arrived from a different direction. It wasn't a contractor this time. It was internal. The call came late, after most offices had gone quiet and the building carried that hollow echo of after-hours power. "Emergency review," my deputy said. "Close circle." 10 minutes. I already knew what it meant. Someone wanted something approved quickly. The conference room lights were dimmed to screen-level glow when I entered. 4 people were present. The undersecretary, 2 legal advisors, 1 intelligence liaison whose expression rarely changed. A single folder sat at the center of the table. No digital distribution. Paper. I took my seat. The undersecretary didn't waste time. "We have a time-sensitive authorization request," he said. "Joint international operation. High priority." He slid the folder toward me. I opened it without speaking. Coordinates, asset lists, tactical overlay, and a signature line. Mine. I read the objective twice. It was framed as containment, but the phrasing was elastic. "Define containment," I said quietly. The intelligence liaison responded. "Neutralization of emerging threat vectors." That is not a definition. A slight tightening around his eyes. "It prevents escalation." "At what cost?" I asked. The undersecretary leaned forward. "Admiral, we are beyond theoretical debate. There is consensus." "Consensus," I repeated, scanning the risk assessment. "Across agencies." I paused on a paragraph halfway down the 3rd page. Projected civilian presence. Low. Low is not 0. "What is the verification source?" I asked. "Satellite sweep." How recent? 48 hours. Conditions. Silence. The legal advisor cleared his throat. Operational fog is unavoidable. Yes, I said, and measurable. The undersecretary exhaled. We need authorization within the hour. I closed the folder. No. The words settled in the room without force. Just wait. The liaison's jaw tightened. Refusal will delay deployment. Yes, and potentially compromise Allied positions. Unverified civilian exposure compromises more. The undersecretary's voice sharpened slightly. You're being overly cautious. I held his gaze. No, I am being precise. Silence expanded, the kind that tests authority. You're aware this decision will be noted, he said. Yes, and questioned. Yes, and possibly overridden. That is within your authority. The legal advisors exchanged glances. I placed my hand flat on the folder. If you override, document the civilian exposure probability explicitly. Remove low. Insert the numerical projection. No one spoke, because numbers eliminate plausible denial. The liaison shifted. You're assuming worst case. I am accounting for it. The undersecretary leaned back slowly. We don't have time for a recalculation. You have time for consequence. The room cooled further. After several seconds, he nodded once. Fine. Revised projection. 30 minutes. I stood. I'll be in my office. When I closed the door behind me, my pulse was steady. I did not feel defiant. I felt aligned. 38 minutes later, the revised folder arrived. Civilian exposure probability, 12 to 18%. 12 to 18, not low. I signed conditionally. Encryption reinforcement required. Delayed engagement window. Additional surveillance layer. If they wanted speed, they would have to carry the numbers. The operation proceeded at dawn. Civilian presence was confirmed within the lower projection. 3 lives redirected before impact. No headlines. No public acknowledgement. Just an internal memo noting appropriate caution exercised. That phrase followed me for days. Appropriate caution. It was not meant as praise. It was measured tolerance. The following morning, I was summoned to a broader review. 20 seats. Press observers in the back. A rare move. The undersecretary opened the session with neutral language. Recent operational delays have raised concerns about agility. Agility. A softer word for compliance. Eyes shifted toward me without turning fully. I waited. A senator spoke next. Admiral, some argue your thresholds are becoming restrictive. Restrictive to what? I asked. Efficiency. Efficiency without accuracy produces liability. Murmurs. The senator continued. You carry significant authority. That authority must not hinder momentum. Momentum toward what? I said. He paused. Strategic positioning. Strategic positioning, I repeated, without quantified risk is optimism. A low ripple moved through the room. No raised voices, no overt challenge, just language meeting structure. The press observers wrote quietly. I could feel the shift. This was no longer about one signature. It was about comfort with my refusal to soften metrics. The senator leaned back. Some feel you are uncompromising. I am consistent. Do you see the distinction? Yes, and I do not find it problematic. A longer silence this time. The undersecretary intervened. Admiral, are you suggesting the current review framework is insufficient? I am suggesting clarity reduces loss. And if clarity delays, it protects. The word hung between us. Protect. That had once been the justification for limiting me. At home, protection meant reduction. Don't speak too boldly. Don't appear intimidating. Stay manageable. Here, protection required precision. I did not lower my eyes. The session ended without formal reprimand. No applause either. Just documentation. Outside the chamber, a junior reporter approached cautiously. Admiral, off record, are you worried about backlash? Yes, I said. He blinked. But not enough to adjust your stance? No. Why? Because the numbers do not adjust for comfort. He wrote that down. By evening, internal chatter increased. Emails questioning tone, messages suggesting collaborative recalibration. I responded with data, charts, documented projections, zero commentary. Accuracy does not escalate conflict, it exposes it. Late that night, Jake called. "I saw the hearing," he said. "Yes." "They're circling." "Yes." "You're not concerned?" "I am aware." He was quiet for a moment. "You know they'd rather have someone more flexible." "Yes." "And you're staying?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because the alternative is distortion." Silence again. Then softly, "Understood." After we hung up, I stood at my window and watched traffic lines shift below. The city moved regardless of oversight, but systems did not. I thought of my childhood dining table, how often I had held back correction to preserve atmosphere, how silence there had protected others' egos. Here, silence would protect no one. The following week, the pressure intensified. A proposal surfaced to redistribute some of my review authority across subcommittees. Fragmentation disguised as collaboration. I read the draft carefully. It would dilute precision, not eliminate it, just soften it. I did not confront it publicly. Instead, I requested a closed metrics audit. Historical outcomes, loss projections, civilian impact ratios, 3 decades of data. When the audit results circulated, the pattern was clear. Every period of diluted oversight correlated with increased collateral exposure. Numbers do not argue, they accumulate. At the next council meeting, I presented the audit without commentary. Slide by slide, year by year. No adjectives, just outcomes. When I finished, the room was quiet. The redistribution proposal was tabled, not rejected, just stalled, which was enough. Afterward, the undersecretary approached me privately. "You're making enemies," he said. "I am documenting consequences." He studied me for a long moment. "You don't bend. I adjust with evidence. And without it?" I remained still. He nodded once. "Be careful." "I am." When I returned to my office, the weight in my chest was not fear. It was recognition. The moment at Emma's party had shifted how individuals saw me. This phase shifted how systems responded. Authority without compliance unsettles people, especially when delivered quietly. I did not seek confrontation. I sought accuracy. The difference is subtle, but measurable. Weeks passed. The pressure did not disappear. It recalibrated. Less direct challenge, more observation. I remained consistent. No louder, no softer, just precise. At a smaller internal briefing, a young analyst approached me afterward. "I didn't know you could say no like that," she said quietly. "You can," I replied. "Without consequence?" "With documentation." She nodded slowly. I saw something shift in her posture. Less shrinkage, more alignment. That, more than the hearings or the audits, stayed with me. Authority exercised calmly teaches others it is possible. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. 2 months after the hearing, the pressure changed shape again. It stopped challenging my decisions directly. It started isolating them. Invitations to informal strategy dinners arrived without my name. Drafts circulated in smaller groups before reaching my desk. Recommendations appeared already polished, already socially agreed upon. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, just exclusion wrapped in efficiency. I noticed because I am trained to notice. One Thursday evening, I walked into a reception I had technically been invited to, though the invitation had come late and without context. A private gathering, no press, senior figures only. The room was dim, warm, designed to lower defenses. Conversations paused when I entered, not dramatically, just long enough. I moved through the space slowly, listening before speaking. Near the center, 3 committee members stood with the undersecretary, their heads inclined toward one another. Their posture suggested resolution. I approached without interrupting. "Rebalancing oversight authority," one of them was saying. "Shared review panels would ease tension," another added. The Undersecretary's voice was measured. It would appear collaborative. Appear. I stopped beside them. Collaborative frameworks function best when built on complete data, I said calmly. All three turned toward me. No surprise on the Undersecretary's face. He had expected me to hear. We were discussing workload distribution, he said. Of course. A thin pause. You've been carrying substantial volume, one committee member added. Volume is not the issue, I replied. What is? Dilution. The word settled quietly. Another pause. We're not proposing elimination of your authority, the Undersecretary said. I understand. Then what concerns you? I held his gaze. Fragmentation without unified accountability. The room hummed softly around us. You assume fragmentation, one of them said. I measure precedent. They exchanged looks. Numbers had already spoken in the audit. They knew that. We're trying to protect you from becoming a focal point, another offered. There it was. Protection. I am not fragile, I said. That's not what we mean. I know. The Undersecretary stepped slightly closer. You've drawn attention. Yes. Attention attracts resistance. Yes. We're attempting to reduce it by redistributing responsibility without redistributing liability. Silence. They hadn't phrased it that way because it was less comfortable. A waiter passed between us. Glasses shifted. Soft music filled the air. This doesn't have to be adversarial, the Undersecretary said. It isn't, I replied. It feels like it. Clarity often does. One of the committee members exhaled slowly. You won't support shared panels? I will support unified metrics. And if the majority favors redistribution, I will request documented outcome projections. Another silence. You always come back to documentation, he said. Yes. Why? Because memory shifts. Records don't. The conversation dissolved there, not resolved, just postponed. Later that evening, I stepped onto the terrace alone. The air was cool, steady. Jake joined me a few minutes later. They're trying to corner you softly, he said. Yes. You could compromise. Yes. But you won't. No. He leaned on the railing. Is it worth it? Yes. Even if it costs you? Yes. He studied my profile. You're not fighting them, he said slowly. I'm not. Then what are you doing? Remaining consistent. He nodded. Consistency unsettles people more than opposition. Yes. We stood in silence. Inside, laughter resumed at normal volume. By Monday, a formal proposal for integrated oversight panels appeared in my inbox. Language polished, intent framed as unity, projected outcomes optimistic. I read it once, then again. The numbers were soft. Projected civilian exposure impact, negligible. Negligible. Not defined. I drafted a response. No emotion, just questions. Define negligible. Quantify historical comparison. Identify accountable authority per panel decision. List override conditions. Send. Within hours, replies slowed. By evening, a request for an internal review session appeared. Closed door. No observers. The room was smaller this time. 7 seats. The proposal's primary architect sat across from me. Your questions imply distrust, he began. They imply precision, I said. We're attempting to modernize process. Modernization requires data. We provided projections. You provided adjectives. A few eyes dropped to the table. He leaned forward. You're resistant to evolution. I'm resistant to abstraction. Silence. Panels increase collaboration, he pressed. Panels increase diffusion of accountability unless structured carefully. And you don't trust others to share responsibility? I trust documented structure. He exhaled sharply. You're making this personal. No. He sat back. You're aware that some consider your approach rigid. Yes. And I consider it consistent. Another committee member intervened. What if we implement panels under your oversight? Then they are not independent panels. Shared authority, then. Shared metrics first? The meeting stretched for nearly 2 hours, no raised voices, just steady recalibration attempts. In the end, the proposal was amended, clear accountability lines inserted, defined thresholds required for collective approval, override mechanisms documented. It was no longer the soft redistribution originally intended. It became structured, which was acceptable. Afterward, as others filed out, the undersecretary remained. "You realize this path narrows options for you," he said quietly. "Yes. You could ascend further if you were more accommodating." Accommodating to what? He didn't answer directly. "You understand what I mean?" "Yes." "And you're choosing this anyway?" "Yes." He studied me. "You don't seem angry." "I'm not." "Then what drives this?" "Alignment." He nodded once. "Be certain it's worth the cost." "I am." That evening I returned home later than usual. My apartment was quiet. I set my bag down and stood still for a moment. This was not about ego. It was not about proving competence. It was about refusing to distort measurable risk for comfort or optics. The pressure would not end. It would adapt. I accepted that. The next morning, I received a message from the young analyst who had spoken to me weeks earlier. "They reassigned me to one of the new panels," she wrote. "Your documentation requirements are now standard." I read it twice. Standard. That word mattered. Not because I had won, but because clarity had become baseline. Later that day, during a routine briefing, one of the senior advisors referred to documented exposure thresholds without irony. Language had shifted, quietly, which is how lasting change happens, not with spectacle, with repetition. That evening, I met Emma for dinner. She seemed calmer. "I ended the engagement," she said without preamble. I held her gaze. "Yes?" I realized I was shrinking. I waited. I didn't like who I was becoming. Silence. "What changed?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Watching you not bend." I considered that. "I'm not trying to influence anyone," I said. "I know." We ate in quiet stretches between conversation. Outside, the city lights moved in steady patterns. When I returned home, I stood by the window again. Authority is not loud. It is not theatrical. It is consistent. The moment at the party had revealed my rank to individuals. The hearings had tested it within systems. The redistribution proposal had attempted to soften it. Each time the response was the same. Precision. No escalation, no apology, no distortion. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. There is a difference. Have you ever noticed how pressure shifts tactics when direct confrontation fails? What did you do when it tried to isolate you instead? If this story continues to resonate, stay with me.